So let's do this. Let's travel back in time. Come with me on my time machine as I travel back in time with Patrick Barber to, what's the year that you started CrossFit?
2004.
1987.
If I didn't trim it, it would go so low that it would go below my chin. I very recently have been researching mustaches quite often. And
Have you?
I've been yes, because in order for me to kiss my wife and understand this new look I'm going for, I had to research mustaches deeply. Henry Cavill comes up a lot in my mustache research. So yeah.
Yeah, well, gosh darn it. He grows a good one.
He does.
What have you
It's sad.
what have you learned in this process? Like what is like, oh, I thought I knew about mustaches, but I didn't, and here's what I know now.
Well, I mean, just there's an entire like demographic of people who devotes their lives to mustaches, and there's like all kinds of trimming etiquette, and there's very different names for them. Like you've got the chevron, which is what I'm going for, but that includes a little down there, but then you got to trim up as it comes through, and then where it goes in relation to the lip, super important in terms of the mustache community. For me, it doesn't really matter, but that deep, loving community of mustache connoisseurs, it's important. Means very different things.
Yeah. Yeah, and really this is a lot bigger than yourself. Like you're doing it for the community.
Aren't we all? Aren't we all though? Like we do
Yeah.
everything for the
Yeah.
community.
Guys, this isn't about me. This mustache is not about me. It's just about honoring those that have come before me, worn the mustache, and just to do it right. I mean, there's some virtue here, there's some ethics, and I'm just trying to uphold those for the next generation.
Yeah, pay tribute,
Yeah. Well, I like the look. I mean, I've
Thank
liked all of your
Looks. But I like the shaved head. I feel like you can infiltrate a lot of different communities with the shaved head and a mustache.
I mean, I can go deeply undercover and many depending on the direction of the mustache, I can go into many places. I could be like ski bum, I could go hipster, I could go there's some other places I could go that I don't want to mention the names, but like I could go there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Like you could be a part of. We could let's just say you could be a part of like a YMCA group.
I could do that one. That's not the community I was going for. I was going. I mean, that one, of course, I could be a part of a YMCA group. I could go to some cool clubs and fit right in. But I could also the one that I didn't want to mention was like ones that carry a little bit more negativity, and that's where I was going.
Oh, gotcha.
Which I don't want to head there. Like the groups, the place your brain went, that was more positive in my mind. But yeah.
Do you have sustainable farming on the piece of property that you live on?
I don't know the true.
Do you grow any? Do you grow anything?
I do.
Do you grow stuff?
We grow. Yes, we grow, and we have 75 fruit trees. So we got peach, pear, plum, avocado, nectarine. We got pomegranates. We got pineapple, guava. We got tons of apples, like 25 apple trees. So we're in apple season right now. We got grapes. We got a little bit of everything, man. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Man, that is cool. Did you ever hear the story about the young farmer and the old farmer?
I didn't, but can you tell me?
Yeah, well, this young farmer came to live on this previous generation's farm, and one morning he comes in and he has a roll of duct tape. And the old farmer says, "What are you going to do with that duct tape?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to go catch ducks." And, the old farmer, he didn't want to make the young guy feel bad, but he was like, "Hey, that's not how you catch ducks." But that night, the young farmer came in, and he had an armful of ducks that he had caught. Now, the next morning, the young farmer comes in, and he has a roll of chicken wire. And the old farmer says, what could you possibly use that for? He says, well, I'm going to go catch chickens. And the old farmer is skeptical, but again, the young farmer comes back, and he has an armful of chickens. Well, day 3 rolls around, and the young farmer comes in with a handful of pussy willow, and the old farmer says, hang on, let me get my coat.
I knew you were going there.
And that's
I kind of felt like you were going there. Yeah.
And that's a joke about cat wrangling.
Yeah. I mean, that's
Yeah.
where they're very important on farms. Like you wouldn't know this, but there's a whole program, which is the barn cat program. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's a very real thing. Where instead of getting a real cat, you get a barn cat, and that hunts for, like, they're feral cats that are going to be put down. You bring them in, you go to the SPCA, they give them to you, and then you feed them for like a month in this cage so they stay around your house. Then you release them into the wild, and then they hang around and eat all of your rats that you have, because there's rats and rodents on a farm. So basically it's a barn cat program. Very real thing. That's where that joke comes from. But yeah.
Yeah. My sister had a boyfriend in high school that gifted her a cat for Christmas, and then they broke up. And so we did not treat this cat as a pet. We didn't feed it. Most of us were, not cruel, but we didn't treat it like somebody that we love. Yet it stuck around, and we lived on 5 acres growing up. And this cat turned into just like this feral alley cat. It would show up, and like its ear would be hanging off because it had got in a fight with, some other animal. And so we'd have to go stitch it up. And then, it would bring, like, just like you're describing. This was the test model for the barn cat program. We actually started it. Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm glad that you started that. We had 2 barn cats that one we called the Kraken, and then one we called Fatty, because one was fatter than the other. We weren't particularly kind with the naming, but the Kraken was gnarly. So we got it, and it had been seemingly traumatized by whatever life it had previous, but anytime you came near that cage, it was savage. And when we released him on the property, like, that was about 2 years ago, and I don't know, like, I like, occasionally I'll catch wind of like this like flash in the night, and I'll be like, oh, is that the Kraken? I don't know, but yeah, they eat a lot of rats. We have two normal cats now, but the 2 barn cats, they're like wandering out and about in space, and who knows if they're still there, but hopefully they have a great
How did the
life.
barn cats get along with the pet cats?
They don't, and that's one of the that's one of the reasons, like, we don't know if our 2 barn cats are still alive, because there's not much conflict there. But yeah, we live out in the woods, so like there's a lot of other kinds of cats, like bobcats and mountain lions and coyotes, and so hence the reason that the barn cat program is what it is.
So basically, there's like a turf war going on in your property.
Straight up turf war, animal turf war. But like, speaking of ducks, and we've had a few ducks taken by bobcats, where they full on jump in, grab them by the neck, and just pull them up over like an 8-foot fence, and you're like, well, it was nice knowing that duck.
Man.
Yeah.
Jeez. How many acres do you live on?
5. 4.78 or something.
That's beautiful, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, well,
I don't even know how
really
we got
cool.
to talking about that. But keep going. Yes.
I was going to say, what's really cool is we're surrounded by like 150 acres of vineyards on one side, 20 acres of apple trees on another, and then like if you go for like a little walk behind our property, there's a 470 acre land trust that it starts in a redwood trees, and then it just opens up, and you can just kind of go walking through it. So even though we're on 5,
Holy
it feels
smokes.
like we're surrounded by a ton. Yeah.
Man, that's really cool. What do you want to talk about? I mean, I have some ideas, but I
I
feel
think we
like
go with your
we could
ideas.
take this in 15 directions.
Let's go your direction. I mean, my brain went some weird places this morning when I was just sitting there with my baby wakes up earlier than every other child, so he tends to hang out with me in the mornings. So, but I was sitting down and I didn't know if somehow we would touch on it, but I was thinking about the types of mentalities around either the pursuit of what you can do versus the pursuit of who you are. And I was kind of, I hadn't fully unpacked the thought. I hadn't even said it out loud, but I was sitting there just because the people who examine themselves and think that they need to be different, like they are not what they should be in sort of a way, like whether it's the way they look or the way they feel or the way they act, versus people who are like, I want to be able to do that, and I want to be able to do that, like, or I want to get this, or I want to go here. And I was just trying to unpack for myself what those differences were, and wondering if the pursuit of being a different thing is actually detrimental, even though it's so common. I don't know. It was something that I was thinking about this morning, but yeah.
Keep going, man. Keep going. I've thought even before like this conversation, also this morning, I was thinking about identity just as like a term in general, and how, for most of us, like you see something, you think, oh, that'll be cool, and so you try it on. But I think we have like this cartoon version in our head. It's like, hey, if I have a denim shirt on and pretend glasses and long hair, like that'll make me like a cool guy. And so now that I have that, it means I am a cool guy. And instead of just saying like, yeah, I'm just gonna try it on. So yeah, keep going with that, because I'd love to hear what you think, and maybe I can contribute in some way.
Well, I think for me, the reason
where did that come from?
Yeah. To me, it came from like I'm pretty happy, and I've always been pretty satisfied with my life. Like there are times where I get frustrated with things, but I'm quite in the moment. I'm pretty satisfied with who I am, and I've always wanted more people to have the level of satisfaction that I do to some degree. And don't get me wrong, like I've had tons of very deep work that I have to do on myself, but I've never felt like I'm the wrong anything, like even the fact that I'm short and play volleyball, I've never been like, I'm the wrong height, like, or like I'm like, I've never flipped it on its head and been like, there's something wrong with me, like who I am. It's always been like, I could be better, but I've never gone that way. And so like, that's what I was examining, is like, where's the thought process around, or how could more people be satisfied with, who they are? That doesn't mean you don't pursue something better. It's just, how could more people be that way? And that's what I was trying to examine. And I was wondering if it was maybe the entire thought process around, like, I've always wanted to be better at things, but I've never thought I was an ass to begin with,
Yeah.
So I think that's where my brain was at, and that's what I was trying to unpack in the moment, because I was like, I want more people to be, not more people to be me, but more people to have the base level of goodness about themselves that I do.
Well, let's say that your son was sitting there asking you, your oldest son is 10, he's 11?
Yeah, 11. Just turned 11.
And let's say that he asked, hey, Dad, how did you get to be that way? How would you describe it? Instead of saying like, oh, well, I was just born this way and, it's just my genetics. Like, if you had to describe a process that you would want him to emulate, so he would arrive at 21 and he would have that same set of optics, like, what would you say?
I wonder how much. So my brain goes to, I wonder how much that can be a conscious choice and direction that you had, and how much of it is how you were loved. Like, to me, when I examine how I ended up here, so much of it is how unconditionally I was loved. You know, like there was never a time in my life where I was like, oh, you know, if I do this, I won't be loved anymore. If I act like this, I won't be loved anymore. It was like, no matter what, I was like really deeply loved by my parents. I had plenty of people in my life that didn't love me. You know, I had plenty of friend groups that I was ostracized from, and I had plenty of, you know, girlfriend. I had my first girlfriend, like that was really important to me. Like, when she broke up with me, she wrote me like a 5-page letter on why I was a bad person. So like, I had plenty of people.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super fun to deal with in 6th grade, right? You know, like, but like but I always felt.
We wish she was a better writer. She could have condensed that if she had had a better command of the English language.
I still have that letter, man. Like, I still have it. Like, I've saved it this whole time. It was super great for me. Like, you learn so much from somebody who doesn't like you, because there's a lot of truth in those things, right? But even in those moments, it was like I knew I was loved. So like, I think less of it falls on my son when he asks that question and says, "Hey, what can you do?" And more of it falls on me to just like be like, "Hey, unconditional with my love." It's not like when he does something that makes me mad, I love him any less. So I got to make sure I express it that way. But I think that question is why I was examining it. Is like, so, because like the pursuit of new things being like, oh, it's not trying to change what I am. It's trying to improve. I don't even know. That's the thing, is like, I was trying to unpack that this morning of what those two pursuits were. And I kind of did it through the fitness vein, because I see so many people who pursue what they look like, and they're never happy in the long run. They're never like, now I'm great. It's what ends up making them more satisfied is, in my experience, anecdotally, has been the pursuit of having the capacity to do more. Like, can I go say yes to snowboarding, or like, yeah. So like, I was kind of trying to think of it through those veins. Do you have an answer to that question, by the way? Like, do you have an answer of, like, say your daughter's asked you, what would you say?
Oh man, I have a few different thoughts on it. I also, you know, I can't look back to my childhood and be like, oh man, you know, I had like this big trauma I had to overcome. Like, my parents were great. Like, they, for the most part, when I was little, like, they didn't make me feel less than. They made me feel like I was a really special kid. I think as I got older and when I started to handle challenges, and just like you described with this 6th grade girlfriend, things where I was less than, what I had to navigate through is reconciling that difference between what my parents taught me and then what the world was showing me, that I was like less than this all-star kid. And some of that comes, you know, dealing with guilt and shame, and just, like I said, reconciling those differences. So for me, I think because I did latch on to things greater than just the essence of what it means to be a human being, it's like, okay, well, now I am this thing, or I'm this thing. For example, hey, if you're told as a kid that you're smart your whole life, and then you do something that's dumb when you're older, that's a hard thing to navigate through, because it you know, it's an attribute that you realize, like, oh man, this isn't true across the board. And so I think if I was to talk to my daughters about this, I would say, the world tells you this. The world tells you that identity is like this blank canvas where you're trying to put as much paint on it. So like a Van Gogh, it's like dripping off the canvas. And the more paint you have, the more roles and the more things that you do, the richer the canvas. And that's a way to go about it. But an alternative way is to think that you're already good enough. That like a sculpture starts with a huge piece of marble. And the sculptor's role isn't to add anything because it's already as much as you could possibly have. It's to strip away all of these things that are unnecessary until you arrive at, like, for lack of a better word, like the essence. And so as your father, I want to tell you that you're not perfect. You have to try hard. There's going to be lots of things that will be difficult for you, but it doesn't mean that you're not worthy if you fail. It just means that in this refining process, we're like stripping things away until you arrive at, like, really just the essence of what it means to be a human, which is, hey, you are valuable. Go and have some adventures. Be curious. Be prepared for heartache and disappointment. But it doesn't mean that it's a reflection of you not being good enough. Something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, that framework sounds awesome. I like your answer.
And I think that's because I've had to, I've had to go through that process myself. It's like, hey, I'm good enough just because I am. It's like, hey, in some sense, it's like, hey, we can agree that all human life is worth something. And so if you strip it down to that, like, I don't need to your point, I don't need to look a certain way. I'll never achieve an aesthetic where I look in the mirror and I say, like, yep, totally arrived. And now it's just maintaining, right? You're always at a deficit. And the same with performance. And we talked about that before, right? It's like any of these things that you put on a pedestal is potentially going to disappoint you. And so I think the hard thing, and I don't even have a good enough command of, like, English to say, like, hey, those things are cool and do it. And I would use you as an example. It's like you've been involved in fitness your entire life, but it seems like it hasn't been such an idol, like such an identity piece, that it's caused you great, like, dissatisfaction. Like you said, it's like you're able to do these things and expand who you are and grow into roles as a father and an entrepreneur and a husband, but you can still find, like, some contentment, and you can still find some peace, and you can still find some satisfaction. Yeah,
I'd agree with that. I actually was kind of reminiscing or, like, thinking about the points you were saying earlier of, like, reconciling that you're not actually great, because that's the flaw that I've had to, not the flaw, that's a lot of the work that I've had to do recently of being slapped in the face with, like, I'm not actually special. And that was what was interesting for me, though, is, like, that was actually really freeing. It wasn't detrimental. It was, like, profoundly freeing. Is, like, when I realized that I didn't need to be particularly great and special, I was like, oh, that's wonderful. Like, it was almost like, even because, like, it was almost like my parents went so far and, like, hey, no, you're amazing, you're amazing, you're amazing. And then there's, like, things that pop up counter to that are like, but I'm not in these areas, and that's okay. It gave me the confidence, like, because they told me I was so amazing. But, like, in my life, I've realized that, like, I'm not that great at 99.9% of things. Like, there's one thing that I know I'm going to be the best in the world at, like, and that's being a parent to my kids, like, I know that I'm going to be the best father they're ever going to have, because guess what? I'm the only father they're ever going to have. So, like, regardless of how good or bad I am at that, I'm the best they're ever going to have, So, like, hey, I can say that I'm the best, but like, everything else, like, there's always going to be someone better than me. Like, there's always going to be a better CrossFitter or a better podcaster or a better businessman, or, like, all these, like, someone's going to be leaner and jump higher. Like, it doesn't, and those things, that was a revelation for me of, like, I'm not special. That was profoundly freeing. And I know for some people that would be soul crushing, But for me, it was like, oh, that's amazing. Like, I don't need to be anything. And these non-congruencies with like where I think I'm so great, and then be like, you never win, dude. You never win. And you fail. And you watch people around you who you consider like low performers just destroy the business market. And you're like, wow, like if they're doing that, either I'm down here, you know, even worse than them, or there's something else going on here. And it was profoundly freeing. And I know for some people it wouldn't be the case, but yeah, it was an interesting difference there. It hurt, but it was great. And when you can see it, when I can step back and look at it, I'm like, oh, this is great. I like this.
Yeah, I think that's awesome, man. I think in one sense, like we were saying, hey, all human life is worth something. But, and I think this goes under that same umbrella, no one's that special, right? I mean, that means we all have that in common. And so that's, you know, like that's across the board. If an alien came to Earth, it'd be like, all right, you know, all these, by my set of eyes, like everybody's the same. And then how would you start to distinguish each other? It probably wouldn't be like I don't even know the right word to say. It's not what you're describing. It's not a multiplayer game, right? You're trying to compete against yourself. Sounds so cliche, but like the father example, it's a single player game. There's no other father that's going to be fathering your children. It's just you.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think about that a lot. It's like no one can beat me at being me. I'm the best Spencer Nix that'll ever exist.
Yeah.
And I think that's a way to feel, you know, because I like feeling special, but I realize that to compare to anyone else besides myself, it feels like a not very like worthy endeavor. But I do like that. It's like, hey, you know, me compared to myself as a father, how could I improve? And
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think what's cool about that and what you're describing is it is freeing, but there's also a lot of freedom in deciding what you want that to be. It's like what you value is totally relative to you. I can't argue and say, "Oh, well, that's dumb, man. You should value something else." Yeah. And so I think as coaches, it's cool to hear whatever somebody has to say, but to arrive at a place where there's like zero judgment for what they come to, as long as that does feel like a really authentic answer for them.
Totally. And I'd like to bring it back to coaches. I love the mindset of looking for authentic answers from them, but then also having the mindset of a coach is always believing that they can do more than they think they can. Like, I think aspiring greatness for them, not necessarily pushing them like you need to be world dominating or anything like that, but always kind of believing them almost more than they themselves believe in them, which then inspires their own belief. In my experience, like I've always been like, oh, that's all, like I think you can. And like eventually they're like, that person believes in me, I might as well believe in myself too. But I've loved that perspective of having people's answers be true and authentic, and a lot of people don't give you those. Like I don't think everyone has the capacity of where they're at in life to give you an answer that is authentic. I think a lot of us hide from certain things. At least the clients that I've had, like a lot of them have a profound undervaluing of themselves, and it's part of my role. I see it a lot of times to show them what they are capable of. And that's, I don't know. I've been proved right many a time in that world by being like, no, I think you can. And then they do it. And then you're like, see, you know, like I told you, like, and that doesn't mean unsafe things. It's like little things like, no, I think you can eventually stand up from the bottom of a single air squat. You know, like I think you can walk up and down stairs without breathing really hard. I don't know. I think it's an interesting balance to play because you don't want to take it too far and be like, I think you can compete at the games. You know, like it's more of like just I don't know. I wrestle with that a little bit just because I think there's two sides to it. Something that's like fake and something that's like, no, I believe in you more than I think you believe in yourself.
Yeah. Well, I think it's hard. I mean, I think that's why it's not very common. It's like, just like we're talking about, it's like you project something ahead. It's like, okay, I think this has meaning to me. I think this has value. And then you try it on, so to speak. And man, if you're lucky, you feel satisfied. If you're lucky, you do that and you feel content. But I think being aware that when you try something on and you feel disenchanted, you try it on, you feel lost, you try it on and you feel, man, even like a little melancholy, it means like, hey dude, that wasn't the right thing. Like, good try, like try again. And I think that if it were easy, we wouldn't be having this conversation, but it's no less important. And the reason I think so is because you have no way of knowing how to talk to somebody unless you have some sense, like having this conversation with you. Like, I don't know every single thing about you, but I know enough about what you value that I know how to navigate the touch points and like the tourist pit stops that we'll have like along this conversation. And without that, as a coach, it's like you're just guessing. And then I think that's where people just assume like, oh, okay, well then, I should want to compete, or you see what other people are valuing, be like, well, that looks good, so I'll try that. Right. And it is hard. And I've had people criticize me and be like, hey man, you can't lead with this conversation around purpose and meaning of life and values because it's too heavy and people just want to come in and like listen to good music and be coached. And I get that. But after a while, it's hard to know where to direct the story because there actually is no direction. Right.
Well, and I think so do you lead with that? Is that your lead is purpose, direction, meaning? I'm curious because you said you did.
We have been experimenting with ways to do that. And because it is so abstract, I'm continually tinkering with what's a way that we can creatively kind of paint someone into a corner. What are some ways that it doesn't feel like they're answering that question that they can derive some meaning from? And so, we've done the Jordan Peterson self-authoring, hey, write your ideal future. That's a little heavy. That's a little lengthy. We've had Donald Miller and others suggest writing your eulogy, which is to be like, hey, when you're dead, what do you want people to say about you? We've truncated that down into, hey, if you were looking into the newspaper, what would your obituary say? And that is a little more finite because it's typically not this grandiose, pageantry, but it's like, hey, this one paragraph in the paper, like, what do you want it to say? And also, so basically just like projections ahead. The obituary has worked the best, and we give them prompts, and we say, hey, for what you accomplished, fill in the blank. For who was there, fill in the blank. And these really simple questions that can titrate it down. But from that, we take that paragraph and we basically strip it of all the fluff and be like, hey, this is what you said you valued. You mentioned your family 7 times. That's really important to you. You mentioned this thing that you're doing professionally. That's not just a job, but for you, it's a vocation. I think that's something right now that's important to you. And so if that's the purpose that their life has, then meaning is the justification for why they can do shitty stuff along the way. That is serving that thing, right? And that's how we kind of back into, hey, and that's why you're exercising. It's not because you want to look good. I mean, that's cool, but this thing that you're doing allows you to fulfill these roles better. And so that takes some time, and I won't lie to you and say it's a slam dunk every time, but when it hits hard, dude.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's a million times deeper and for lack of a better term, more meaningful, and it's getting to the root in such a way that you're seeing meaning in what you're doing. Like that's so much. You're doing that for a reason. That makes sense for when it hits. And I'm sure what you found is that some people just aren't there. Like some people just aren't.
Yeah, totally.
And like that's you and I have talked about this before. Like some people, like you can't really make anyone do anything, but you can provide the environment that they're going to make the choice themselves a little bit better. Hence, like what you're setting up is like you can't force them to write the eulogy, but you can give them the opportunity to do so. And maybe they're like, oh, wait a second, let me examine this a little closer. So you're like providing an environment. Whereas I think some people, like you're saying, you probably get some serious whiffs in there where you're like, whoop,
totally
didn't strike gold there.
And when that happens, it's like, hey man, that's awesome. Like what you came up with. In my mind, I was like, this is terrible. Like this isn't gonna work. But for them, it's like, hey, that's great, man. Great. This is a great start. Great place to begin. Because if somebody did this to me at 22, I would have whiffed as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think it's no less important to at least try, because I think, if all of life is like inducing stress and then trying to recover, this thing we're talking about, it gives you traction to make sure those things are imbalanced. And like too much stress, we know what that looks like, as a father. We know what that looks like as a husband. Too much recovery, we know what that looks like. It's like you can kind of conjure up like this phenotype of like what that person describes. But we can also say, hey, this person that's perfectly has stress and recovery and balance, but they don't have a reason for why they're doing it. We also can imagine like what that person looks like. And it's none of those scenarios with all three of those things look like something you'd want to follow in their footsteps for. So I think all three of those things are important. And that kind of brings me to the next point. I wanted to do a slight historical reenactment with you around CrossFit in general, because I think some of the perspective you would have is probably different than what I laughed out loud at the post you had where you're like, like the stupid ass videos where people snap and like their outfits change. If you didn't see it, Pat had an Instagram video where he's like, okay, I'm going to change it to you were in like sweatpants and like a t-shirt. It's like, I'm going to change it to my special CrossFit workout uniform. And you snap your fingers and you say, it's the same clothes I have on. It's just it's just these clothes.
Yeah, that was it.
So let's do this. Let's travel back in time. Come with me on my time machine as I travel back in time with Patrick Barber to, what's the year that you started CrossFit?
2004.
1987.
I was 1 year old.
To 2004. And for those that really walk into a gym, and CrossFit's completely transformed what at least micro gyms or boutique gyms look like. Describe to us what that experience was for you, because I'm curious how similar, how contrary it is to what people experience today. Ready, go.
Yeah. So you're talking about I walk into the very first CrossFit gym, what that experience was like?
Yeah.
So I was 18. I had done my first exposure to CrossFit was at my school. And it was my teacher had brought it up to the school and was like, we're going to do this stuff. And it was all like body weight. And he ended up bringing a barbell up. And one of the first ones was like the Inman mile, where you walk a mile with 135 pounds on your shoulders.
God bless, man.
Right? And so he's like, here's your workout. And it was like, pardon? Nah, dog. Like that's like I weigh like $135.
Torture.
Like totally. It was straight up torture. And I was like, this is working out. Like I didn't understand. It was just like, it felt so much like a game. It was just like, can you mentally and physically do this? And like, there's a very strong reality of no, like many times along the way where you're walking and like, you're like, I got this. And then you're like, I'm 400 meters in. I don't got this. I don't got this at all, but I'm going to see how far I can go. Oh, I still don't got. And like, and you hit all these walls and then you break through it. And then you're like, okay, I can go a little bit more. And then finally you just physiologically give out. And you're like, well, nope. And you like put it down. And there was this hugely different psychology around that than anything I'd ever experienced. I'd never reached failure like that of like, just, you can't go on. Like I've always been relatively physically gifted. So like sport was never that hard. Even like beep test, like a beep test is a good example of that. Like beep tests were like eventually you can't go anymore. It's a good, it's like you're either here or here. And like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But even in beep tests, I would usually come close to winning, if not win. So like I was always framed as like, I can do it. And this was just like one of those things where it's like, you just can't do it. And, so that Inman mile and those first experiences, I was like, this is interesting. So flashback to walking into the first CrossFit gym. It was tiny. It was about the size of my garage here. And it had a second story. And there's 2 bay doors. And you walk in. And across the door is a pull-up bar. I remember it being bent a little because they hadn't really figured out how to make it not bend. Because it was just like plumber's pipe and some weird clamps that was going on there. There's a cargo. There was
just shred your hands.
Shred your hands. And they were like really thin.
Shred them.
Like in the center of the room, there was 2 big poles and a cargo net up between the poles. And then there was kind of tires outside. There's a balcony that had all the machines up on it. And then down below, there was 2 big Gravitrons and a GHD. And then there was like plates and bars and like and then 2 ropes and then a couple sets of rings and then more pull-up bars in the back. And I remember walking in and being like, this place is full of stuff, but it looks nothing like any gym I've ever been to. It was like, it looked more like a gymnastics facility. I was like, this is like, it looks like a playground. Like that's what it looked like.
Yeah.
And what was fascinating about the original CrossFit gym is it wasn't like classes. I mean, it was, but like you had probably 15 trainers who all would run like small groups, like 1 to 3 people at the same time almost. It was like there was no set times. It was like you had your trainer and you guys would all show up and find your spot and do your thing. So like you could show up to the 4 o'clock class for Hollis, or you could show up for Nadine, or you could show up for Greg, or you could show up for Brandon. And so walking into that, it was like, this is really cool. Let's do this. And then I just got, I had my coach and he would tell me what to do. And I loved not knowing what we were doing. I loved showing up and just being like, let's do this. Tell me what we're doing. And it was different every day. And I didn't know how to monitor my energy. So I would vomit every time. Like that was, which is not sustainable, but like I had a
that's hard to keep up.
It's very hard to keep up. And I had a ton of vanity, and I would go in there with my friends, and if I felt like I should win the workout, and I wasn't, like I had a few times where I definitely didn't do all the reps. There was a few times where integrity came in there, and then I'd have to go home and sit with that and be like, you just freaking cheated. Like, what are you doing? And so that happened a few times, and I never got called on it, but like I called myself on it. And after a few times of doing that, I was like, you know what? Let's go ahead and not do that anymore, because it felt horrible, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, but that was me walking in 2004, 2005-ish. Fun. Oh, I also remember being extremely frustrated that I couldn't do a lot of the movements. Like cleans and jerks and the Olympic movements, they were so complicated to me, and I couldn't do them as a guy who finds himself pretty physically gifted. That I remember that was interesting.
So my brother and I came to visit the 2-car garage. This was in 2006, so I guess a couple of years after you started. And because we found it through the website, you know, your brain tries to reduce things down to something that makes sense. And so there's a workout of the day, and so we just assumed, and you know, there were affiliates popping up. We're like, okay, so it is a very structured format. You show up, there's a workout of the day, and you do this. And when we showed up to Santa Cruz, it was just like you described. It was like, oh, we had this workout, but there's 20 people, so we're just going to change. It's a completely different workout. And we're like, what? They're like, yeah, we'll come up with something else. And we're like, huh? And then, you know, we had seen, you know, you only see what you see. And it's like, okay, Brendan Gilliam, he has board shorts on and tattoos and no shirts, and he has muscles. And so we, you know, just like the identity thing, it's like, okay, we want to be like him. And so we came and we did like a series of like one-on-ones, and it was cool just to be like, okay, this is really like it's a private training studio, and oftentimes a bunch of people will train at the same time. And I think that's something that's misconceived today because it is so formalized and it is so structured. But I also miss that ability to be fluid or call audibles or just change something on the fly. Because now if you did that, people would lose their minds. If you're like, hey, we're not doing this workout, I'd be like, what do you mean? Right?
Yeah.
When you were there, how much I have a question for you. Like I've always gravitated towards, and I think when I first found CrossFit, it was like this it was this conflict, right? It was this conflict against what society said fitness needed to look like. And for many years, like that was the crusade, especially with like the seminars. It's like, hey, this is what a big box gym does, and this is what we do. Yeah. And I wonder how much of that did it feel like that, you know, in some of that fight against society, I would say was like the segmentation of training where it was aesthetics only, you know, where you were prepared for nothing. And CrossFit was kind of this punk rock movement against all of those things. Did it feel like that in the early days? Or was that like something that wasn't even on the radar? It was just what you said, like, hey, it was coming to a place that was novel and cool, and I got to do workouts with my friends, and we weren't even thinking about the social implications.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason that I frame it the way I do is because I didn't have much gym experience outside CrossFit. Like I had always not enjoyed gyms, and I'd been to literally like a couple. And I enjoyed playing sport. So I never wanted to work out. I just wanted to play my sport. And so I had very limited gym experience. So when I came to CrossFit, I was like, oh, this is what gyms are. But then as I went to normal gyms, as I grew up, I was like, this is not what gyms are. So there was, and then I heard all the rhetoric around me being like talking about it, you know, like the way Greg would talk and the way Tony would talk and the way Nicole would talk and Dave. And it was like the people who were doing CrossFit at the time were 100% counterculture. And that was they were early adopters in counterculture, and it was 100% punk rock. And that fueled a lot of it, being like, look, what you're doing over there sucks. And it's like, and it's not helping people. I mean, one of his initial mission statements was to undermine the fitness industry as it stood, because he has that story that he told about, he was at the local Gold's Gym here, and he was doing some CrossFit out of the corner of it, and he had so many members who were coming and helping and working with him, and eventually the owner, who was his friend, was like, "Hey, look, Greg, come back in the back with me." And he like goes in the back. He's like, shows him the Rolodex of all the members. He's like, "These are all our members. Like, do you have any idea what would happen if all of these people came in? Like, our gear would be destroyed. Like, blah blah blah. Like the entire industry was founded on selling memberships that don't get used." And that like fundamentally disagreed with Greg's understanding of what fitness should be. He was like, it can't be this. So like he was going counterculture. He wanted to undermine that industry as a whole. Like he's like, let's make it so people, if they pay for a gym membership, they use it. And that was one of his initial stories. And that always stuck with me because I was like, oh, okay. All right. And so, yes, it was punk rock. Yes, it was all these things. And yes, it is not that anymore because it has been so co-opted by mainstream. But it's like, the reason I don't frame it like that is because I didn't have much experience. So to me, my perspective of it wasn't, hey, this is really counterculture. Like my perspective of it was like, oh, this is really cool.
Yeah.
I kind of just got to see it for what it was.
This is cool. Yeah.
Yeah, this is cool. I'm in. Everything else has told me not to, but to go to the gym. But this feels like a game. This feels like sport. I'll do this.
I have a problem with nostalgia in that sometimes when I look back, I can reminisce and only see it through rose-colored glasses. Like I can look back and be like, oh man, if we could just go back to the first year where, we were doing this, and I only think about the good things versus like, we didn't have AC, or man, a lot of people got hurt, or yeah. So on and so forth. When you look back to like those early days, what were some of the problems? Like, what were some of the things where it's like, you know what, this part's cool, I like this, but I can see like, hey, this isn't developed enough. Or as an example, I remember in the early days, like they would bring in subject matter experts, and they would. Tony would make a video, and I'm watching the video, and it's like, this isn't going to make the cut. This isn't going to last. It's like virtual shoveling, or they had some track expert and you might have been on the video, made people like walk over hurdles, and I was laughing my ass off because every time they stepped over the hurdle, if you weren't tall enough, you got racked on the hurdle. And the video, I mean, it's like a comedy sketch. And so I'm watching this from the distance, be like, well, this won't make the cut. So I'm sure you have a perspective of like lots of things. It was like, hey, we tried this out, it wasn't great. You don't want to go back there. As commercialized as CrossFit is now, you don't want to go back to this period because of this reason. Yeah, I mean, I think two big things that weren't great back in the day, and some people might disagree with me on the first one, but the first one is like, we didn't have, how do I say this? We weren't inclusive enough. Like we didn't have language that everyone could hear. Like you can be an asshole and people will still do what you do, but there's a giant demographic of people who won't do what you do because you're an asshole. So like in the original days, like we kind of like, we have this magical product, right? What CrossFit is. I think we had to be counterculture. We had to be like, F you main system, and like people who got us, and people who didn't. And I think that was important initially, but that turned off a huge demographic of people and gave people the wrong perception of what we actually are. Because like this program is far more beneficial to the infirm and the people who have like negative psychologies and who are scared of fitness and who like don't conform to the mainstream gym, and it's not working for them and they can't do it, and like they've tried and they've tried and they've tried. Like we're more beneficial to those people as a program than we are to the like gung-ho counterculture. Yeah, I'm already an adventurer. I'm already into like the stuff that's hard. Like, yeah, if you're already into it, cool. We're a good program for you. But if you're not into it, we need to get you on board. So how can we not dumb down what we do, but be soft enough in our language to you hear something that you're like, okay, I'll try it.
Because like what Greg's always said is like the best way to experience this is to come in and try it. And like you can tell people till you're blue in the face, but I think the language then is not like wasn't great. And I'm stoked that we've come far enough along to be more inclusive with the statements that we make. So that's the first one. The second is, I'm going to be honest, coaches sucked back in the day. Like the actual act of coaching, like I'm a good athlete. It took me like 3 years to understand clean and jerk, right? Like it took me so long, and I had many coaches who just couldn't articulate in a simple enough way to where I would get it, right? Right now, I can take a brand new person and get them understanding the clean and jerk to some level of proficiency where they're not overthinking it in a single session. Like it's not that hard, but we didn't have the language, and there was no people who could deliver this information to normal people. The best coaches at the time were like collegiate level coaches who were already dealing with athletes. Or like Olympic level coaches who dealt with Olympians. Like, so like the normal coach couldn't articulate these complex ideas in simple ways. So like back in the day, we did a disservice to many people by not understanding basic movement standards. And it wasn't like there was anyone who was great. Like there was like Mike Bergner. Mike Bergner was the first guy I ever saw who I was like, whoa, like you can articulate these big complex ideas in a simple enough way, and then boom, that you get it. Whereas like every other coach, even all those original OGs, like I'm not gonna lie, they were garbage relative to today's coaches. And like and if you're one of those OGs and you listen to this for some reason, like be honest with yourself. We were all bad. And nowadays I've seen a lot of those OGs grow to be some of the best coaches in the space, but still it's just like back then we were bad. And that's just a reality of it. I don't know if you remember those times, but it's like it's very different than what it is now.
I do. And I think because, as being on the receiving end of that, you don't know any better. But like Mike Bergner's a great example. Like you thought he was a sorcerer when he first came on the scene because of, just like how many was like, what? How did he do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with those 2 points. And it's hard, especially the first, because that's what drew me to it.
Yeah.
But you realized, very quickly, it's like, man, the person that needs this is not the person that's receiving it. And that's been something that's plagued me for as long as I mean, when we first opened our gym, everybody that showed up was just like my brother and I.
Yeah.
It was like carbon copies. No girls, dudes, into exactly what we were into.
Yeah.
And, that's fun. That feels punk rock, but it's like you're not serving humanity the way that you potentially could. So let's fast forward to today. And I think that anybody that was in that 2-car garage would say, wow, man, this is really developed in ways I couldn't have seen. And so when you fast forward today, there's probably like a dream scenario, and then there's this bizarro or kind of nightmare scenario. And I'm not going to say that we're in a nightmare scenario. I'm not saying that. But I also would bank that we're not really in the dream scenario where we thought that this would propagate towards. Where do you see like that point of conflict? Because we make light of it and be like, hey, you don't need a mouth guard and wrist wraps and lifting shoes and a special outfit. Like that's different than where we started. But what are some of the other things that you wish were different? And that's not shitting on where it is, but it's just with the perspective you have, which I think is really valuable. What would you hope that we could strip away, kind of like we said earlier, and get back to the essence of like what it is?
I think if I had my way, I really like what you're doing personally. I think if there was any way to
Thanks, man.
make more people understand the deeper value of this and the real meaning behind a lot of this and how fitness can support this, I think that would be my dream scenario, is to incorporate the understanding for more coaches in the psychological benefits of all of the stuff that we're doing, and that these pursuit of difficult things and the meaning behind all of it. Like, I think that's my ideal. That's one of the reasons I love talking to you, because I think that you're trying to do it you're doing it relatively extreme. Like I would say what you're doing is on the far end of, like, you're making people do self-authoring stuff before they come in to do your training. Like, that's deep. I mean, but we have to tinker there before we can, like, hey, is it better to do that on the front end, or is it better to trick them halfway through and make it fun and bubbly and, oh, this community and da and then you go into it, like, who knows? Like, but I think that my dream scenario is that we start to get away from, because, like, it's funny, like, the nightmare that we are in, if you want to call it a nightmare, to me is the pursuit of CrossFit for CrossFit's sake. Like, we're just trying to be dominant in the act of doing CrossFit. So it's like, can we just do fitness for fitness sake? And it's like, that pursuit to me is more noble than the pursuit of fitness for aesthetics sake, but it's still not the pursuit that I want people to pursue. Like, I think that's a step in the right direction, because more people are more capable, but I still think it's not. I think understanding, like, taking it to the level that you're talking about, of understanding the true depth to all this, and just having it be really fun and having it assist the rest of your life rather than be your entire life. Like those are the steps that I would love to see be made. Do you see what I'm currently doing with my little going back to the beginning thing with all the workouts?
I've seen the you mentioned the word Odyssey, but give me context and help me understand, like, where that came from.
Well, so I wanted to, like, go back to Greg's original workouts. Like, let's with the mentality that I have now, with the understanding of fitness, with the understanding of movement, let's go back to 2001, February, when Greg posted the very first CrossFit.com workout.
How important has the clock been, or going as fast as you can, compared to, maybe the first time through?
Well, so here the clock is not important to the same degree of me needing to dominate the workout. In fact, I think what's fascinating is you go back, and a lot of these workouts have very, like, that like the Inman Mile. There's these psychological breaks that happen, like, that you just can't go any further. So, like, we did. I mean, I'm six workouts in now, and today I have to do my 7th. But, like, the one of the workouts was 1 hour, as far as you can, 1 pull up, 1 push up, 1 sit up, 1 squat, 2 2 2, 3 3 3, 4 4 4 for an hour. How far can you go? Like, that's the whole workout, and it's like, you just reach total failure at some point, and you're like, well, all right, I guess I'll wait around here on the push up a bit more,
Yeah.
But then, like, there was a squat workout that was so there was this one, like, you should try this, like, just to where your brain goes. There was a squat workout. It was a back squat day, and first what you had to do was find 21 rep, like a weight you could do 21 back squats with, just normal back squats, relatively comfortably. That was the framework that he gave you, right? So do 21 back squats relatively comfortably. Then you're going to do 3 sets of back squats. And the way he framed it was, you do 1 back squat and then repeat 20 times. So it was 21 for each one. And the first set, you did, he called them power squats, where it was fast down, fast up. And you had to stay in perfect form, right? That was the thing you had to do. Perfect form, fast down, fast up. So that wasn't too bad. Then the next 2 sets, the second one was bottom to bottom. So you have go to the bottom, you do a 10-second hold, stand up for 21 reps. That's like 14 minutes worth of being under a bar. For me, it was 9 minutes of being under tension. Like I'm sitting there, like I started at 95 because I did my 21s at 95, and I ended up with 7. I failed on rep 7, and I'm like sitting there at the bottom, like trying to hold for 10 seconds, and just collapsed. And then I had to put it back on, go to 75 pounds, and it was 10 straight minutes worth of squatting, and I nearly died. And then the final one, get this, it's 20-second descent, hit the bottom, 20-second ascent. So it's a 40-second squat for 21 reps. That's 15 minutes under tension. It's crazy. And I had to do it with an air squat. So I'm sitting there like on the way down, like shaking the whole way down, but it was just psychologically such a mind screw. And like today's workout, I think today's workout, it's you set a 30-minute running clock, and I got to do as many rope climbs as I can, rope ascents he calls them, and push-ups. How many rope climbs and push-ups can I do in 30 minutes? And then I have to swim 15 laps around a pond or any sort of body of water I can find. But they're fun and they're playful.
Dude,
anyway,
that's exactly what I'm talking about. Yes. And I think I've talked to Chan about this, and we said at some point you felt like every workout had become closed. Every workout, there was a consensus like, hey, this is how this combination looks. This is how it goes. And I think what you described, almost every single one of those, it's open-ended.
Yes.
There is not just a potentiality, there's almost a certainty that you're going to fail. And how you reconcile that. It's why death by has always been one of my favorite formats, because it's not like, hey, if you'll fail, but it's like you will, and how are you going to deal with that? And I think that's, if there's an inoculation to real life, it's like workouts like that are about as close as an action-based program we could do in therapy to like deal with that in a controlled environment. And it's those kind of things that I wish you could facilitate in a large group. It's harder to do. You know, you basically just have to, that's what goes back to the beginning, where you have to have like kind of this ragtag group of people that show up on Saturday and be like, hey, we don't know how long this workout's going to take. And you're like, what? You're like, yeah. I mean, we're just going to do this thing, and we're not really sure how it's going to go. Yeah. And man, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I do too. And I think I do wish that we could incorporate more of these kinds of workouts into the gyms, because I think so many of the workouts we do these days, we've just maximized for power, like, which is what we talk about gives us results. So I understand how we got here, but it's like at some point in time we lost a little bit of the like, this is open-ended. Like, and some people could argue like, oh, an AMRAP's open-ended. Yeah, it is, but not in the same way. You know, like not quite the same way.
Yeah.
I love it. I'm really enjoying it. It's just me in my garage here. So feel free to join me, Spencer. I'll text you the workouts.
I think I will do that, because I think, you know, when you like survey the landscape, just in like the 10 general physical skills, but then when you expand that even broader, it's like, hey, what do I need as a human being? I think what I need is like the ability to handle failure better. The components of hardiness, where it's like, hey, how do you navigate things that aren't completely within your control? Like, how do you do that? And so I found myself like coming up with these weird ass workouts, not for the sake of trying to maximize my power output, but trying to like tap back into some of that stuff that I thought was like so beneficial, but that nobody could really verbalize like what it was.
Yeah.
In those early days. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know we got to go, but I got a couple of workouts for you as well that as far as I can tell, I just made up. I'll have a playlist with different songs, and for each song, there's a different movement. So if it's a hard rock song, it'll be like a certain type of category. And then when a different song comes on, it's a different type of movement. I don't know how long the playlist is going to go, and I've shuffled the song, so I don't know what the sequence could be. That's also a really fun thing, like we talked about. You know, like it could be 20 minutes, it could be like an hour and 30. But in the one thing that I wanted to say is that it's like brought quality back into the equation for me in a weird way, because I agree with what you said. It's like when there's a clock, despite my best efforts, it's typically not the most quality version of a movement that I could do, because I've been so conditioned to like move fast and to try to create like wattage. But in these open-ended workouts, I find myself like not caring so much about the rep or how much I'm doing, but caring about like the position, because I know that, I mean, that's, you want to figure out zone 2, just tell yourself that you don't know how long you're going to do something, and you find yourself in like it's like a zone 2 mentality. It's really
absolutely.
pretty easy.
Oh yeah, super easy. That hour one got me. I was like, an hour? I don't think I've ever done anything other than run or row for an hour. You're telling me I'm going to do push-ups and pull-ups? This is going to be the slowest freaking workout of all time.
I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. Thanks for letting me put you on the spot, especially with like some of the early day stuff. And
course,
man, appreciate your friendship. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, anytime. I always enjoy my conversations with you, Spence.